Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, how are you? I know this is not the face that you were expecting to see today, but here we are. We all knew this was coming. And today I'm in charge of explaining and developing the American Romanticism Part 3. As you know, we've been learning about the other parts of Romanticism with Professor Chavarria. And today we're going to learn about a couple of other authors that are really important for the American literature history. And these authors are Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne. I know these names are very familiar to you. You know Edgar Allan Poe because he's one of the best American writers in the whole world, and we have Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is also one of the best writers, not only because they wrote about some specific topics, but also because of their technique when they were writing these books and stories mostly. So today we're going to learn about their lives, their personal lives, their influences, how their lives were shaped until they got to be these famous and so well-known authors that we know now. And of course, more important than their personal lives, we're going to talk about their literary contributions and how their writings contributed to what we still know as American literature, because it's not only something that they wrote many, many years ago, but also how all the things that they did and all the things they introduced to new authors shaped the way of literature now. So to start, it is really important to clarify these two terms. We have American Romanticism, which is a very broad term, and we have Dark Romanticism. Because this is part three, I'm going to take the time to explain why I want to do why I want these terms very far from each other. American Romanticism is the general category. This is the general movement. It was a reaction of, yes, the Enlightenment. And American Romanticism had different stages. It was not the same. It has different stages. So come from, the idealization of love. We come from transcendentalism, and we got here, dark romanticism. Dark romanticism, it's a subgenre of American Romanticism. It's still in the same category, but it's a little bit farther, like far from the other ones. As you can see, it says dark, and that's not because um, we need to divide dark with what we know as gothic, because those two words are sometimes we confuse those words. When we talk about dark romanticism, we are talking about many authors who decided to write about the human brain, if I can explain it like that. Uh, the thinking process, how we see things, it was more psychological, right? The human fallibility, the this easiness that we have to, go to a very dark place or a very bad place and do things like sin, guilt, murder, death, and those are themes for dark romanticism. And when we say gothic, that's a little bit more grotesque. That's more graphic in the way they describe maybe how someone died or things like that. Here we're not. When we talk about dark romanticism, we're not going to focus on that. In dark romanticism, we talk about how guilt may affect how you think, or how the things that you do may completely destroy your life. And it's not like there's an antagonist who's trying to who's trying to stop you. No, you are your own enemy in dark romanticism, and we're that's what we're going to see. So we were going to start with Nathaniel Hawthorne. Let's remember Nathaniel Hawthorne was the person, he wrote the Scarlet Letter. We already know about the Scarlet Letter, but just so you have that in mind. And he was born as Nathaniel Hawthorne without the W. And he was born in July 4th, 1804, and he died in May 19, 1864 in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, if you see Salem, you know where we're going. He was an American novelist, he was a dark romantic, and he was a short story writer. So here we're not going to talk about books or novels. We're going to talk about short stories. Usually, short stories are like 3, 4, 10 pages long. So that's the kind of work that he decided to do. His works often focus on history, morality, and religion. His ancestors include John Hawthorne. I don't know if you remember this name, but if you don't, he was the only judge involved in the Salem witch trials who never repented of his actions. And Nathaniel decided to change his last name because he didn't want to be, when he was in social gatherings, he didn't want to have that, background. He didn't want other people to relate him with this person, right? Because after all the Puritan fever happened, people started to know that what they did was not right, and maybe they didn't have evidence, like enough evidence to do what they did. So he didn't want to have that bad reputation since, like, from the beginning, without people even knowing him. So that's why he decided to change it, and he only added W. That doesn't make a lot of difference when you pronounce it, actually, but that was that. He tried to hide it at some point, right? So this is Nathaniel Hawthorne. Salem. Let's remember that. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Salem. He was friends with transcendentalists, but he was not part of the transcendentalist movement. So it's basically that he respected what they believed, but he didn't share it with them. He actually believed that evil was the dominant force in the world, and his fiction expressed a gloomy version of human affairs. So one thing that many of the Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories have is that there's some part of like romantic relationship between some characters, but there's also the evil around all that plot, around all the actions in the story. Now, if we talk about his writing style, this is maybe one of the most important parts. Many of his works combine historical romance loaded with symbolism and deep psychological themes, as I was saying before, bordering on surrealism. So here, as I was saying, we have in the story maybe two people that fall in love, or two people that start having feelings with each other, but there's evil around, and that means that one of them is going to fail, or one of them is going to, I don't know, make the other one feel bad, or someone around the context of these two characters is going to do something that's going to affect the whole story. And that is related with the psychological themes, because it's not only that they did something, it's also how that affected the characters. And that's what we saw in the Scarlet Letter. It was not only that they commit adultery, it was all the judgment that they received and all the critics that people um, said about them, and how they led the main character to just isolate herself from the whole town, because those things, those feelings, those emotions that we usually don't have in other stories, we have it in the dark romantics writing style, and of course in Hawthorne's stories. His later writings also reflected his negative view of the transcendentalism movement. So let's remember that he was friends with some of them, but at some point he decided to write, and he decided to just talk about the things that he did not agree with about this movement. And some critics, like people that have read Hawthorne's work, have applied feminist perspectives and historic approaches to Hawthorne's depictions of women, because it's not only about the Scarlet Letter. He also had different female characters in other stories that were not considered like subplot. It's not like they were only the secondary characters. Mostly they were the main characters, and the whole story was around them. So that's why they said he was not writing about women as, the very fragile and incapable being, but like people who could really achieve even more than men. Because there's one book in which he talk about that, and it's not like the women would have a lot of money or a lot of success, but they would be happy with themselves, and mostly that's what is was more important in his work. Now, what made Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? What were his influences? We have four, and they are mostly the same. um he has a Puritan family background. He has, the Puritan tradition and moral sincerity as a consequence of being in a Puritan family, his early childhood, and the Salem witch trials. Now, let's remember that what the Puritan beliefs were. At some point, Hawthorne started to disagree with all that until he went to the other corner of the spectrum. He decided to just go as far as he could, and his early childhood also included his past, right? Because his grandfather was one of the judges of the Salem witch trials. So he was, in most of his works, he was trying to just maybe look for excuses about that, and that's maybe one of the characteristics of Romanticism, to go and look to the past to see how you can fix some things about that. So he used to write a lot about the past, and exactly in the Salem witch trials. It's not that all his work was about the Salem witch trials, but it's noticeable that many of his stories have that aspect in it. So it's not that he just left it aside. Now, if we want to talk about themes, there are many themes, of course. He wrote more than 30 short stories and books. These are only some of them, but the most important ones, or the most relevant ones, are that many of his themes were about psychology. As I was saying, how the human brain worked, the guilt and sin, because we are talking about how evil human beings can be. So we obviously we're going to have guilt and sin in there. We have, and also human morality and religion. But when we talk about human morality and religion, we're not talking about of doing the right thing or doing what it's expected. No, it's mostly a contrast between guilt and sin and the human morality and religion, because many of their religion beliefs and the norms of the society only affected the characters to feel more guilty and to feel sinful, or for things that in our times now would be acceptable, but at that time it was like going insane if you could do something like that. So this is psychology in their best expression. Now, some of his work, let's talk about this. Some of his work are The Scarlet Letter, a romance, we know this one, The Birthmark, another short story, and Young Goodman Brown. Those are the three stories that I chose. Actually, it's not. He has many more if you're interested. But about the Scarlet Letter. You're going to know about the young Goodman Brown, because in the workshop you're going to have something explain about that one. So we're going to talk about the birthmark, just for you to remember who Hawthorne was and how amazing his work was. Now, the birthmark is a short story, of course, and the tale examines obsession with human perfection, how humans look for perfection, how they try so hard to achieve perfection, and not their type of perfection, but the one that society has ruled that we have to follow. So, this is a story about a scientist and his wife, He was a really successful scientist, and he decided to just leave that, like pause that for a minute. And he decided to give love a try, and he got married. But his wife had something uncommon in his face. I'm sorry, in her face. She had a birthmark, like a little spot in her hair and in her face, like a little red spot. And that didn't affect this scientist at the beginning, but then he started to have a very sick obsession about that because he believed that his wife was perfect, would be perfect if she didn't have that one thing that was the birthmark. So he decided to have a lab, to create his lab and go to his lab and try to find potions or, medicine to help her to stop having that. He even at some point in the story, he says like he has a dream where he dreamt about just cutting that birthmark from his wife's face, which is very disturbing. And his wife just woke him up and asked him what he was like dreaming, because he was talking while he was asleep, and he remembered about that one. So it was that sick that he was even just having those thoughts just because he wanted perfection in his wife. At some point, he convinced her because she felt that was like he felt sick when he looked at her, and she got at some point that she was desperate to, as a normal human being, get his her husband's love back again, right? So she agrees that she will try some treatment that he has been working on to see if they can take that birthmark from her face. And he did, actually. He created some medicine where he could, like, with about what the components of that beverage was some plants, and she decides to drink it, and she drinks it, and then she falls asleep. When she falls asleep, he starts noticing that the birthmark is disappearing from her face. It's just fading away. And then she wakes up, and the birthmark was almost gone. You could not even see it anymore. But she tells him that she's dying. And this is the romantic part. Well, at some point romantic, because he she says that when her birthmark completely disappears, she's going to die, and she actually dies when the birthmark disappears. So yeah, it's a really interesting story. It's not that long, if in case that you want to read it, because I just explained it, like I poorly explained it. You can just read it and you're going to love it. And this is about Nathaniel Hawthorne. Let's remember. Now we're going to talk about Edgar Allan Poe. I'm pretty sure you've read, well, we have, well, I don't know if we, but some Spanish teachers assigned some stories about Edgar Allan Poe, even though he was not a Spanish speaking person, but his work has been translated, and we have books like The Raven, we have books like stories like The Black Cat, and we have access to all that. So Edgar Allan Poe is maybe not someone that you have just learned about, but he was a really interesting person. And not only because of the type of fiction that he wrote, because let's remember, this is all fictional. It's fictional. It was not based on reality. This has nothing to do with history. It's more their imagination and their creativity. So Edgar Allan Poe, he was born in 1809 and he died in 1849. So he was what, 49 years old? No, well, I'm sorry, like 40 years old, I guess. He was an American writer, poet, essayist, literary critic, and editor. He was the representative of American Romanticism. If you think about Romanticism, and most more in dark romanticism, this is the name you're going to come up with. He was the creator of the form of the modern detective and the genre of psychological prose. So as I was saying before, was he opened the path for many authors. He was a genius in literature, and if you know Agatha Christie, she's one of the best, like most well, she's one of the well-known authors in the detective genre, but it was actually Poe who started it. And the biography and education. What was his life? How did he ended up where he was? Well, he had a very tragic life in some aspects. Well, he had very bad experiences that affected him at some point, if you want to say it like that. When he was 3 years old, his mother died, and his father abandoned him when his wife died, right? And he was not an only child. He had another two. Well, he had a sister and a brother, and Paul. They were all at the end. They were writers. And when he died, there was a person who kind of adopted him. They were separated. They couldn't be together, so they went with the different families. And Paul ended up with John Allen. John Allen was his foster father because he never adopted him, like officially and legally. He didn't do it. But he gave him a house just to, like, he raised him as best as he knew how to, because there's a lot of criticism about this person and how bad he treated Edgar Allan Poe when he was a child. But at some point, Poe decided to go to university. He went to college, and he did not receive any support from his foster father in England and Virginia because he started to have some negative habits like gambling. So he had a big debt, and that's why he decided to drop out, because he didn't have the resources to pay what he was owing to other people. And he decided to, just started writing, and he found out that that was his real passion, writing. And he went, at some point he decided to leave John Allen's house, and he went with one of his aunts and his cousin, who was 13 years old at that time. And he started to write. He also got enlisted in the military, and then he refused to go, but they said that he will get a trial if it didn't go. But he did a lot of stuff when he was growing up. But all those things, I know I am just giving the overall context of it, because that's is not as important as the rest. But I want you to remember that, because that is seen in all his works. All these things that I'm telling you, his mother's death, his abandonment, how this other person treated him, all the negative experience that he had to endure to be the person who he was after. So going back to where when he was living with his aunt, she was very ill and she was poor. She didn't have any money. So he decided to just give literature a try, and he decided he was going to live and support himself by just his writings. And that's how he started. His first book was published when he was 18 years old. So he was out of this world. And he started to write. He started to go to work in newspapers, in magazines. He was doing critiques to other people's work, like literary work. And he started to earn some money, but it was not like he was having the best life, right? At some point he fell in love with his cousin, and they married. But yeah, I know that might not be one of his best actions for us now, but who are we to judge him? And he loved her. There are rumors that they never consumed their love, but that's not what I'm going to focus on today. Now, some curious facts about him. He was a literary trailblazer. And what's a trailblazer? It's the person that was opening the path for many other authors. He was the first one that invented or just give hints about the detective stories. He talked about things that many people were not talking. They approached, he and Nathaniel Hawthorne approached very different aspects of the human nature, because it's not only what you can experiment with nature and things like that, but also what is inside of you. How do you think? All these cognitive processes that you are having when something happens to you, and how this cognitive process is affected or influenced by the society and the society rules. So that's mainly what they were talking about. He created a new profession because um, Poe was actually he is considered the first professional American writer, because he decided to live, like, he decided to just pay his rent and all his expenses from his writings. Maybe it was not the best life, as I was saying, but that's what he decided. That's why he receives that, title. He was a prodigy, as I was saying before. He wrote so many stories, short stories, poems. He was prolific because he wrote critiques, he wrote poems that you cannot even imagine that he wrote it, because we have this image of him is like as this dark person who only talked about death and murder and things like that, but he also wrote poems that were very beautiful. And also his death is as enigmatic as he was, because he had some problems with alcohol. He had an alcohol addiction, and he used to disappear some days. Like, people didn't even know where he was. He suffered his wife's death, and after that, it was just everything went down. He wrote many stories after his wife died, but he was not the same. And at the end, he disappeared for 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, and then he appeared, and people looked at him, and he was not in the best condition. He was in really bad conditions. They took him to the hospital, but he died there. It's still know what he died from. Like, they don't know if it was because of the alcohol addiction. They don't know if he had like a stroke, or what was the cause that ended his life. But yes, he was an enigmatic character, and his death also was, and it still is, because they didn't make an autopsy when he died. Now, some themes that we can find in his works are these ones. And these might not be maybe themes per se, but it's like most of the major characteristics of his work. We have rivals and doppelgangers. I'm sure, well, when we see these two words, rivals and doppelgangers, we can think, what's that from? Like, what does that mean? We're not talking here about epic literature, but it's because, as I was saying before, we're focusing this in the mind, right? In the mind. So you don't have any rival. No one is trying to take Juliet's love from you, like in Romeo and Juliet. It's how you are destroying your own life, how you are your rival, how you lead your own path to self-destruction, and your doppelganger is the one who's doing that. So you have your evil side, and you also have your good side, right? This one is the one that's going to win in the dark romantic stories, the one that's, the evil side, because this is where we are more inclined to do the evil, because it's part of our nature. And that's one of the difference. If we talk about transcendentalism and then regular romanticism, we're going to find that you believe in the goodness in your heart and the right thing to do, and how people get their punishment or because of their bad actions. But here in dark romantics, it's not about that. It's about how these evil thoughts affects you until you die or something bad happens to you. Another theme of his works are the dead and the living. It's dark romantics is something. that you can expect. There's usually death involved, and there's usually the living aspect explain us how what you did is affecting your life after it. We have the power of memory because most of these stories are not taking place in in the moment, so the narrators are not living that in that specific moment. It's usually the narrator saying what happened before. There's one of his stories that one of his characters is in jail and he's remember all the things that he did. Like he is narrating the story from jail, but all the things were in the past. And that's how the power of memory is also important. Not only because of that, because when we talk about memory, it is that the characters can't forget what they did. So if they did something bad, they are con- like they are constantly thinking in that, and that's another of the themes. And of course the self, because it's more introspective, the solitude. And this is very important because many of his books talk about how the characters had a very big social circle. It's not they had friends, they had wives, they had family, but still all these people had a very common thing, that was that they were feeling alone. And the consciousness, and when we say when I say consciousness, I refer of how aware they were of that what they did was not correct, or that what they did was not supposed to happen. Now let's talk about his literary work. There are many short stories from him, but these are the three that we're just going to remember: The Raven, the Telltale Heart, and The Black Cat. So the Black Cat, you know, and the Raven you also know, but the Telltale Heart is the one that we're going to talk about today, because the other two are very famous, and I'm sure maybe if you haven't read it, you have some ideas or like some background knowledge about them. But the Telltale Heart is not one of um his most well, it's not one of his well-known works. It's there and you know it's good, but it's not something you're going to say, oh yes, the Telltale Heart, right? Yeah, that's the Edgar Allan Poe's masterpiece. It's not like that. So the Telltale Heart is a short story and is told from a first person narrative of an unnamed narrator. Here we don't know who this person is. We're just going to read it, but we don't know who that person is. Who insists on being sane, but he's not. He suffers from a disease, nervousness, which causes him over acuteness of the senses. So just as an introduction of this story, there's this is one person, a man, or that's what we can infer, who claims that he is sane. He doesn't have anything. He's just like other normal and regular ordinary people. He's not, because that over acuteness of the senses means that his senses were more sharp, and that made made him feel in a more intense way everything that was happening around him. So it's not like he could listen, like he could hear, he could smell, he could taste, but he would do it in a different level than normal people would. So if you could hear a scream, it's something like you would say it's high, that person would feel like his ears are exploding because of the over acuteness of his senses. So because of that, he is always nervous, he's always anxious, he's always receiving all these signals, and he suffers from that because another person who doesn't know about his condition would think that he's just a very nervous person. What happens here is that he tells the story about a man, his neighbor, who lived in an old house. This is an old man who did nothing to threaten, who did nothing to him, but he felt terrified about this person. He didn't trust him at all. He was scared to death about this old guy. And he blamed this person of, like, he blamed him for his nervousness. He would say that this person was the reason why he was like that. He was not, of course, but he used to say that. And the thing that bothered him the most was his eyes. The old man had one very light blue eye, and he had another eye with, like, what we would say now it was a glaucoma or something like that. But he was like, he had his eye white, like his pupil was white instead of any other color, and that scared the hell out of this person. He believed that it was not something normal. There was something supernatural hidden in there. So he figured out that there was something about the old man's eyes. It was not like that. There should be a reason but why he was like that. So this man thought that he needed to do something to stop that, because he couldn't live his life because of this person's eyes. And he was constantly in that state of, terror because of that, of the old man. So he said if the younger man did what he was thinking about doing to stop the presence, because he believed that there was something supernatural, he may not have gotten the result that he wanted, but rather be haunted for eternity. So what happened is that this man at the end decided that he was going to. He used to spy on his neighbor, and one day he saw his neighbor. He was asleep, and he saw that one of the eyes of his neighbor was open, and the other one was closed, but he was asleep, and that was too creepy for him. So he decided to just take a pillow and put it in his neighbor's face and kill him. And then he decided to hide this person in one of the rooms of his house. So when the police officers got to his home, he just opened the door like a normal person would do. He was trying to act normal, but of course, he wasn't. And remember, this is only a very bad summary of this story. There are a lot of details that I'm leaving, like that I'm left in um, out, but you can read it. It's like 3 pages long. I'm serious, like 3 pages, and you're going to love it. So what happens is that the officers get there, and he opened the door where the um the body was, and he suddenly started to hear that, like, the heartbeat of the old man, and he thought he was like going nuts, and he was, but there was nothing in there because of his over acuteness. He thought that the heartbeat could be listened, and he thought that he was not the only one who could listen the heartbeat. He was, but he didn't know that. So he got to so anxious, and he started to feel so guilty, and all these things were just affecting him so much that he decided to confess his crime because of the heartbeat. And that is the reason why this story is called the telltale heart, because the heartbeat was the one, like, that helped discover the body of the old man and this story. Now, I'm explaining this not only because it's important, but also because it's going to help us with another activity. Let's just remember as a summary that what we have learned so far is that Hawthorne and Poe are part of the Dark Romantics branch. They are This is their Romanticism, and here we have the Dark Romantics, and they are both in the same category. They are both important in this movement. And let's remember that one of Hawthorne's works was the Birthmark, and here the Telltale Heart. Now, just to verify and do a little bit more engaged in this class, we're going to have an activity, and we're going to go to escape room. I don't know if you guys like scary things. This is not going to be scary at all. This is going to be maybe something, I don't know, like a detective. So we're going to be detectives, because you now are trapped in the same room where the Telltale Heart story took place. You are in that room, the one that I was saying before. Yes, you are there. And you need to escape before morning. But in order to do that, first you will need to find the answers to solve some locks. It's a escape room. It's not going to be easy. So you're going to have different hints, and you will have to decipher some of those hints, so you can write them down in Google Doc form that it's going to be like your um, exit ticket of the escape room. And some activities that you will encounter in this escape room are puzzles, hidden messages. You're going to watch some videos with information that you really need to pay attention to. You need to find an exact address, and you need to find, and at the end you will need to answer a quiz. So there are 5 different sections: a puzzle, hit a message, watch a video, find an exact address using Google Earth, and at the end you will need to answer a quiz. The activity will be solved in groups, so it's not that you're going to do that by yourself. You can divide the activity in different, you can say, okay, you're going to do this one, I'm going to do this one, and at the end you all share your answers, so you can show a proof that you did this activity. You will need to really read the instructions. If you have any questions, you can reach me out. But as I was saying, if you get, oh, I'm sorry, that's a spell word there. It's a typo. It was stuck. If you get stuck, please reach me out. Let me know that you are having problems with that, and I will try to answer as soon as I can. And yes, you really need to read the directions. You will need some websites, so please remember that. You will need Google Earth. You will need to have you will see a Google document there, Google Doc form that you will need to fill out with your classmates. So it's only going to be one, and this is not going to take so long, but the answers for this are going to be posted after you finish the task. So it's not that you are going to be able to check it out before you're going when the due date has passed. You will be able to see the answers. And I'm going to show you this. I am sure I'm going to uh, show you this in a different way. In this escape room, you have here the instructions. Of course, as I was saying, you have a team that you need to work together. These are the instructions, and this is the escape room. You're not going to only learn about the Telltale Heart, you're also going to learn about Edgar Allan Poe's life. More information than the one I gave to you. I recommend you to go there to view escape room in a full browser. Click here. I really recommend you to do that. You'll find some clues. Here you have the Google Doc form that I was saying. Log 3, log 4, log 5. Those are the answers that you need to gather. You will have a Morse code there, so you better read this so you can have more context when the time of doing the activity takes place. As I was saying, Google Earth, you have some instructions there of how to solve a cryptogram, the full text of this story, the Edgar Allan Poe biography, the Poe Museum, things like that. So you have all the resources that you may need here. And when you reach to the 360 degrees view, this is what you're going to see. You can actually, let me see. You can actually listen to the big part in there. And you're going to look for this button, start here. Then you're going to hear, the first clue. This is Edgar Allan Poe's wife, Virginia. Here you have the second clue, how to use Google Earth, a video. This is a box that you need to solve. And here you see the heart, and this is the final clue where you're going to show what you learned today. So basically, that's what you're going to do. Oh, of course, here you have the Roland Post portrait, the raven, yeah, and another clue. So this is what you're going to do, guys. I am sure I'm going to record a video explaining this better, but basically that's what you're going to do. If the sound, like the heartbeat sound, bothers you, feel free to just mute it. But yes, and if you get any questions about this topic, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video. I try to do it as brief as possible. I there was so many, like so much information that I wanna explain. So thank you so much for your patience. I hope you learned something new today. Please solve the activity. And of course, if you have any questions, if you have any inquiries, anything you want to tell me, if you get any problems with the workshops, because I know some of you have had some problems, please reach me out. Even if I haven't answered or replied to your email, I know it's there. I have read it and I am working on that. And there you have my email. So thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon, evening, whatever. And yes, thank you for being in the class today.